Hey bookaholics, it's Isabel and welcome to another video. So as you can tell from the title, I'm going to be talking about the pros and cons of audiobooks. So when I started reading, I didn't go to audiobooks. I usually only read physical books, and the occasional when I couldn't actually buy the book physically, I would read ebooks, but I never went into audiobooks. I knew what they were, but I didn't really want to try them because I never really did any research on them. But after starting BookTube, a lot of people were reading audiobooks and I was curious. So I did read audiobooks and I definitely saw some of the pros of reading audiobooks, but I definitely also realized there's a few cons with them as well. So I just want to discuss those pros and cons with you today. So let's get right into it. The first pro for audiobooks is you can listen to it while doing other things. So you can multitask. So you can still read while you are cooking, or you can still read while you are driving to work, or you can read while you're commuting. You have so many options where you can still listen to a book while doing other things. And with a physical book, you can't do that. Like, I know some people open a book and they can walk on the street and they can still read, but that's not the safest way to do it. You can definitely not read while driving, and you can't read while you're cooking. So audiobooks definitely give you that way to listen to a book, still read while doing other things, which is a big pro for me because sometimes I don't have the time to just sit down and read, but I still want to read something. So being able to listen to it definitely helps me get through a lot of my TBR books. On the same note though, there is the con that when you're doing other things while listening, you can get easily distracted and you miss a lot of stuff. I know when I'm listening to an audiobook and I'm distracted by my thoughts, or I'm distracted by doing something else and I'm paying more attention to that than what I'm listening to, I miss some crucial information and I have to rewind and I don't know exactly where that is. It's hard to kind of find where you were lost in an audiobook because you can't scan through where you left off, you know, like in a physical book, but with an audiobook you can just rewind. So that's definitely a con for that. You can miss a lot of stuff that you wouldn't necessarily miss if you're reading it physically. So that's definitely a con for audiobooks. The next pro for audiobook is the narrators give the book personality. So I've read multiple kind of audiobooks, and there's some where the narrator just brings the book up even more because of its cast. If it's a full cast, definitely gives it more character, or if the narrator is just so wonderful to listen to and really gives the book personality and character, it's honestly such a different experience because you're able to listen to this narrator telling this story to you in such a way that you wouldn't experience when you're physically reading it. And sometimes it's just such a enhanced way of reading because you're able to really listen to their dialect and their emotion to their voice, and it just gives the book that much more power. So I absolutely love when a narrator just spot on in the audiobook. On the other hand, there are some audiobooks where the narrator is awful. Either the narrator just has a voice that you can't stand. I've found some audiobooks where I just had to stop because the narrator was just so cringy and just very, very hard to listen to, and that really negatively affects the book. Sometimes it's the narrator doesn't know how to create voices. Like with some narrators, they create these different voices for these different characters and it just adds so much to it. But on the other hand, there's narrators who try to make voices and it just sounds awful and it's very hard to listen to. So definitely narrators do make an impact on if an audiobook is enjoyable or not. The next pro for an audiobook is it can get you into a book that you just can't get into physically. So for me, I have some books that I have a hard time really getting into and reading, but once I start reading the audiobook, I just dive right in and I start really enjoying it. I'm not too sure why this is. I feel like sometimes when I'm reading it physically, maybe I'm distracted by other things and I just can't concentrate on it, and then I just don't enjoy it. But when I'm able to listen to it and doing other things like cooking or something like that, it makes it easier to concentrate because I know I'm still doing something other than reading, and it just makes me feel more productive, you know, rather than just sitting down and reading. So audiobooks definitely give you that chance to dive into books that maybe you're not able to dive into physically. On the other hand, audiobooks can sometimes be less engaging. So when you're reading a book physically, there's definitely this connection that you have to the book. You're able to create voices in your head, or you're able to kind of picture them differently than when you are reading an audiobook. When you're reading an audiobook, you kind of just get the narrator's perspective of that character. But when you're reading it physically, you're able to put yourself into that and put your own perspective on it rather than taking the narrator's. So you're able to kind of dive into it definitely differently than the audiobook. There's definitely a bit of a physical barrier when you're reading audiobooks. When you're reading physically, you're able to kind of connect to the characters more. You're able to connect to the setting more because you're reading it and physically seeing the words rather than just listening to it. One pro that I love about audiobooks is they are a shelf saver. I've read multiple books through audiobook that I wasn't too keen to buy them, but I was able to get them through Scribd or Overdrive and was able to read them that way. And that just saves some room on my shelves because I don't need more books on that shelf when I don't necessarily want to buy them. So audiobooks definitely give me that chance to read a book that I kind of want to read, but I don't want to buy. One con for audiobook is you're not able to highlight quotes. You're not able to actually physically write down a quote that you like. So when you're like reading physically and you find a quote that you absolutely love, you can highlight it if you're into highlighting books. I'm not. But you can write it down in your own journals or something like that. You can mark it somehow and remember that quote. But with an audiobook, you can't. You can maybe listen to that quote over and over and write them down, but usually you kind of miss them. In the same vein as like distancing and distractedness, audiobooks kind of take you out of wanting to write down quotes, you know? Like with an audiobook, you're kind of just listening. You're taking it in, but not in the same way that you're taking in when you're reading. When you're reading, you actually see the words, you actually see how the words are put together, and you're able to see how powerful that is. But with an audiobook, you're just listening. And usually when you're listening, you're not seeing the words, you're not really taking in what's the quote saying, and you're not able to really get the impact that they are. So with that, you're not able to highlight and you're not able to mark down those quotes that are freaking fantastic and you love. So that's a downside to audiobooks. And the last pro for an audiobook is it is environmentally friendly. With an audiobook, you're not paying for the trees and the stuff that went into making that book. Someone else can buy it, but you don't need to buy it yourself because you got an audiobook. So it's a bit environmentally friendly in that way. And one of the cons for an audiobook is it is technology dependent. So if your phone dies, or if whatever you're listening to the audiobook through dies, you can no longer read it. That's kind of frustrating because if you're really getting into the good parts and then your phone dies, you're just like, so it can be very disappointing when technology doesn't work and it's not working, especially with Audible. With Audible, whenever I kind of want to buy a book, I have to go on my laptop, get it there, and then I have to transfer it onto my phone and then I can listen to it. It takes a lot more steps. With Scribd and Overdrive, it's a little bit easier, but with Audible, there's a lot more steps that you have to take through technology to actually read that book. Those are just a few of my pros and cons for audiobooks. I believe that audiobooks are great. They're definitely a way to read books. I know there's kind of like the hate against audiobooks, and I don't agree with that. I think audiobooks are great. I think they're a great way to read it, and it's a great way to enhance your reading experience. There's some books that I absolutely love more because of an audiobook. Sadie by Courtney Summers example, Daisy Jones and the Six is another one, and then also My Lady Jane. Like, these books were so enhanced by the narrator and the cast that I don't think I would have enjoyed it as much if I didn't read the audiobook. But I don't deny that there are some terrible ones out there as well, that probably reading the physical one is better. I'm hoping you guys enjoyed this. I'm hoping it was a bit educational, a bit informative, and you guys can agree with some of my points. And if you do, let me know down below in the comments, and give this video a thumbs up if you enjoyed it. So on my channel I talk about movies, TV shows, and books, so if you want to discuss those with me, definitely hit the subscribe button and the notification bell so you know whenever I post another video. And I'll talk to you guys later. Bye!